So the first thing I'd like to do together is the ancient programming ritual of the Hello World application. Developers usually start any new language by learning to print Hello World to the screen. And we're going to do this in a console application, which runs in the command prompt. The command prompt is great for learning the syntax of the language because there's no buttons or graphics or anything like that to be concerned about. All you can do in the console is read text and write text, so it keeps it very simple. To create our application, we're going to go to File, New Project, and we're going to make sure that we choose Visual C# on our Templates menu on the left, and then we're going to choose Console Application. Be warned that if you double-click Console Application instead of single-clicking, that it's going to create the project automatically with the default name of Console Application 1, which isn't really ideal as a name. We want our names to be more descriptive. Let's go ahead and in the name box type Hello World .ui, which stands for User Interface. You're going to notice that when you were typing, that's the solution name also started filling in, and it's copying the project name. This is the default for a new project, and the first question you're going to have is, what is a solution? Well, when your applications get bigger and more complicated, you're going to have multiple projects. You may have one project that's in charge of working with the database. You may have another project that contains all the business logic and rules for your application. And then you may even have a third project that's a web application or a console application or a forms application, something to do with UI. You can have projects for testing as well. So as you get more and more projects, the way that you organize them is to put them into solutions. So a solution is just a container for multiple projects. My rule of thumb is to name the solution after the application, in this case, Hello World, and then name the project, the application name dot, and then what that project is responsible for. In this case, our console application is the user interface, so I'm going to name it Hello World.ui, and it's going to be in the solution Hello World. Now if I hit OK, it's going to spin up our very first project. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the Solution Explorer over on the right. Here you can see the solution, Hello World. Inside it is the Hello World UI project. And this project has a bunch of folders, properties, references, which we're going to get into later, an app config, which we're going to get into much later, and one file called program.cs. And if you couldn't tell from the C# logo next to it, a CS file contains C# code, and it's what we use to build our applications. In this case, it created a default file. It named it program. It also took the liberty of opening it for us in Visual Studio. If we had multiple CS files in our project, we can just double-click them to open them up. And I'll demonstrate this by closing it and double-clicking it to reopen it in tabs. And when you open multiple files, they'll come across the top bar here in a tabbed interface, so you can jump between files pretty easily. Now there's a lot of code in here already that I don't expect you to understand right now. We're going to deconstruct this code in the next lesson. What I'd like you to do for now is just type console with a capital C, dot or period, right line, then a parenthesis, then a double quote, and say hello world. Now I want you to go to the end of the line and put a semicolon at the end. In C#, a semicolon is put at the end of any statement so that C# knows that you're done executing the code. Now we can run this application right now, and there's two ways to run it. We can go to the Build menu and say Build Solution, or we can hit the Start button. And if we hit the Start button, we're in for a little bit of a surprise. You're going to notice that it just flashes the console window and then it immediately goes away. And that's because when a console application is done running, it automatically closes itself. So we're going to prevent that from happening. And the way we're going to do that is to put a second line of code after console write line. We're going to type console.readline, parentheses, semicolon. Now, if console write line writes data to the console, console read line is in charge of reading data in from the console. So it will wait for the user to input some text and hit the enter key at the end of the text line. And that enter key is what's going to finish the console read line statement. So the repercussion of this is that our app is going to stay open until we hit the enter key. So let's run this again. And you'll notice that your console window pops up and says hello world. And the cursor sits there waiting for us to put in some user input. We can just hit the enter key and dismiss this application. The next question beginners usually have is, well, where does our application come from? Where does it live? And I'm going to show you that right now. If I right-click on the helloworld.ui project and say Open Folder in File Explorer, you'll see that in my documents, Visual Studio 2013, projects, Hello World, helloworld.ui, here are the files that are in the Solution Explorer. But there's two extra folders here, a bin and an OBJ folder. Let's open the bin. And now here's a folder called debug. And when you see debug, that's because our current build mode is debug. Debug is for testing your applications. If I open this, here are all the files that Visual Studio created and compiled. That's an important word. Compile is the process of taking your code and creating an application or executable. It compiled your code into the helloworld.ui application. So if you double click this directly, it's going to bring up our application. No problem. We can hit the enter key and send it away. So if you wanted to give your Hello World application to a friend, all you'd have to do is open up this bin debug folder, and you could throw all of these files into a zip file, send them over to your friend, and as long as they were running a Windows PC with the .NET framework on it, which is installed by default in current versions of Windows, they could open and run your Hello World application just fine. Now if we go back to our bin folder, I'm going to show you building in release. If we change this folder to release mode, it's still going to compile your code and do everything like it did before. But release mode is optimized for finished applications. So it's very common to work in debug mode when you're building software. And then when you want to give your code to your friends or ship it for your job, you should change it over to release mode. So I'm going to hit Build Solution. And if we go back to our bin folder, you'll see now there's a folder called Release. And if we go into that folder, again, here's our application. The folder in the files here is not a lot different than what we had before. The internals are a little bit different though. So you'll just have to take my word for that. Again, if we double click the application, it will bring up Hello World, and we can hit the enter key and dismiss it.